The dust kicked up in a thick cloud as Asher Townsend rode his tired mare across the parched Arizona territory. The year was 1878, and he had been running from his past for so long that the running itself had become his life. The golden sun hung low in the western sky, painting the rugged landscape in the hues of amber and crimson as he approached the small settlement of Juniper Springs. Asher had never intended to stop in this town. He'd been heading to California, chasing rumors of gold and a fresh start, but his horse needed rest, and so did he. As he rode down the main street, he noted the usual fixtures of these frontier towns: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and scattered houses built with more practicality than beauty in mind. The townsfolk eyed him with the customary suspicion they reserve for strangers. Asher was used to it. At 32, he had grown accustomed to the wary glances his 6'2" frame and weather-beaten appearance attracted. His face, though handsome in its rugged way, bore the marks of a hard life, a thin scar across his left cheek from a knife fight in Dodge City, and eyes that had seen too much death for a man his age. Asher dismounted outside the local saloon, his boots hitting the dirt with a thud that matched the weariness in his bones. He tied his horse to the hitching post and gave her an affectionate pat on the neck. "Just a quick drink, Penny," he murmured to the mare. "Then we'll find you some water and feed." The saloon was like countless others he had frequented over the years, dimly lit, smelling of whiskey and sweat, with a haze of cigar smoke hanging in the air. A few heads turned as he entered, but most of the patrons were too engrossed in their drinks or card games to pay him much mind. Asher preferred it that way. He made his way to the bar and caught the bartender's attention with a slight nod. "Whiskey," he said, his voice carrying the coarseness of trail dust. "And information, if you're selling it." The bartender, a stout man with a graying mustache, poured him a shot of amber liquid. "Information's free if I have it. What are you looking for, stranger?" "Work," Asher replied simply. "Just passing through, but my funds are running low, and my horse could use a few days' rest." The bartender nodded thoughtfully. "Town's small, but the Galloway Ranch about 5 miles north is always looking for good hands, especially with roundup season coming." He pushed the whiskey toward Asher. "Nathan Galloway's a fair man. Pays decent wages." Asher downed the whiskey in one swift motion, feeling the familiar burn down his throat. "Appreciate it." He was about to order another when the saloon doors swung open and a hush fell over the room. Curious, Asher turned to see what had caused the sudden quiet. A young woman stood in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the evening light. She stepped inside, and Asher felt an unexpected jolt in his chest. She was striking not in the conventional way of the painted women who worked in places like this, but in a manner that spoke of quiet strength and purpose. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though a few tendrils had escaped to frame her face. She wore a simple riding dress of deep blue, dusty from travel, but well made. As she scanned the room, her eyes, a clear, determined green, met his briefly before moving on. Asher found himself strangely unable to look away. "I'm looking for Sheriff Hollister," she announced, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent that seemed out of place in this rough establishment. The bartender gestured toward a door at the back. "He's in his office, Miss Galloway." The woman, Miss Galloway, nodded her thanks and strode purposefully across the saloon floor, ignoring the stares of the men around her. Asher watched her go, intrigued despite himself. There was something about her demeanor that suggested she was not someone to be trifled with. "That's Nora Galloway," the bartender volunteered, noticing Asher's interest. "Nathan Galloway's daughter, just returned from schooling back east a few months ago. Smart as a whip, that one. And twice as sharp." "Galloway," Asher repeated, remembering the man's earlier words. "The rancher looking for hands?" "The very same." The bartender refilled Asher's glass without being asked. "This one's on the house. You look like you've ridden a hard trail." Asher nodded his thanks. "Been riding for the better part of 2 weeks, California bound, or at least I was." "California's still there," the bartender shrugged. "No rush in getting to it, I reckon." Asher considered this as he nursed his second whiskey. He had no particular reason to reach California by any certain date. No one was waiting for him there. No one was waiting for him anywhere. The thought of steady work and a few solid meals was appealing. He was finishing his drink when Nora Galloway emerged from the back room, accompanied by a weathered man wearing a sheriff's badge. Their conversation appeared tense, though Asher couldn't make out the words. The sheriff seemed to be trying to reassure her of something, but her rigid posture suggested she wasn't satisfied with his responses. As she turned to leave, her eyes once again found Asher's across the room. This time, the contact lasted a moment longer before she broke it, heading for the exit with determined strides. An impulse seized him, one he couldn't entirely explain. Dropping a coin on the bar, he nodded to the bartender and followed her outside. The evening air had cooled considerably, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Nora Galloway was untying a chestnut mare from the hitching post when Asher approached. "Miss Galloway," he called, keeping a respectful distance. She turned, wariness evident in her stance. "Yes? Do I know you?" "No, madam. Name's Asher Townsend." He removed his hat, a gesture of politeness his mother had instilled in him long ago. "I overheard the bartender mention your father might be looking for ranch hands." Her eyes narrowed slightly as she assessed him. "You're looking for work?" "Yes, madam. I'm handy with cattle and horses. Been working ranches since I was 14. She studied him for a long moment, taking in his trail-worn appearance. "We are short-handed," she admitted finally, "especially after—" She stopped herself, something flickering across her face. "Can you start tomorrow?" The suddenness of her acceptance surprised him. "I can, but don't you want references, or to know more about me?" A small, tired smile touched her lips. "Mr. Townsend, out here a man's work speaks for itself. If you can do what you claim, that's all that matters. If you can't, you'll be on your way by sundown tomorrow." She paused, seeming to consider something. "Are you armed?" The question struck him as odd. "Yes, madam. Got a Colt revolver and a Winchester rifle." She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "Good. We've had some trouble lately. The ranch is 5 miles north, as I'm sure someone's told you. Ask for me when you arrive tomorrow morning." With that, she mounted her horse with practiced ease and, without another word, urged the mare into a trot down the dusty street. Asher watched her go, puzzled by the encounter. There had been something in her manner, a tension, a wariness that went beyond normal caution around strangers, and that question about weapons. He returned to his own horse, suddenly curious about what kind of trouble might be awaiting him at the Galloway ranch. It seemed his journey to California would be delayed a while longer. The night at the modest boarding house passed uneventfully, and Asher rose before dawn, his body accustomed to the early hours of ranch work. After a simple breakfast, he settled his bill and rode out just as the first rays of sunlight began to streak across the horizon. The trail to the Galloway ranch was easy to follow, a well-worn path leading north from town. As he rode, Asher took in the surrounding landscape. This was good cattle country rolling grasslands, interspersed with clusters of juniper and pine, with mountains rising blue in the distance. Water seemed plentiful too, judging by the lush vegetation along the creek beds he crossed. After about an hour's ride, he crested a gentle rise and saw the ranch spread out before him. It was larger than he'd expected, a substantial main house built of timber and stone, several outbuildings, a large barn, and multiple corrals. In the distance, he could make out the shapes of cattle grazing on the hillsides. By all appearances, Nathan Galloway had built himself a prosperous operation. As Asher approached the main gate, he noticed signs of disrepair that seemed at odds with the ranch's overall prosperity. A section of fencing was broken, and one of the outbuildings appeared to have fire damage. Curious, but not yet concerned, he continued toward the main house. A young ranch hand spotted him from one of the corrals and jogged over to meet him at the gate. "Help you, mister?" the boy asked. He couldn't have been more than 17, with a freckled face and sandy hair poking out from beneath his hat. "Asher Townsend. Miss Galloway hired me on yesterday. Said to come by this morning." The boy's expression brightened. "Oh, thank the Lord. We've been short-handed something fierce. I'm Billy Cooper." He gestured toward the main house. "Miss Nora's up at the house. I can take your horse if you want to head on up there." Asher dismounted and handed the reins to Billy. "Much obliged. Where can I find her?" "Just knock on the front door. She's probably in her father's study doing the books." Asher thanked him and made his way to the house, noting more signs of recent trouble as he went. There were bullet holes in one of the barn doors, and the windows of the house had been recently boarded over on one side. The front door opened before he could knock, and Nora Galloway stood there, dressed more practically today in a simple blouse and riding skirt. Her hair was braided and draped over one shoulder. "Mr. Townsend," she greeted him. "You're prompt. I appreciate that." "Yes, madam, I try to be." He removed his hat. "Looks like you've had some excitement around here." A shadow crossed her face. "You could say that. Come in, we should talk before you decide if you still want the job." This was unexpected. Asher followed her into a spacious, well-appointed home that spoke of both comfort and taste. She led him to what appeared to be a study bookshelves lining the walls, a large desk covered with ledgers, and a map of the territory pinned to one wall with various markings on it. "Please, sit." She gestured to a chair across from the desk as she took her own seat. Asher sat, placing his hat on his knee. "I get the feeling there's more to this job than just ranch work." "You're perceptive, Mr. Townsend," she sighed, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "The truth is, we're in a difficult situation. My father was shot 3 weeks ago." Asher straightened in his chair. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is he—" "He's alive," she replied quickly, "but badly wounded. The doctor says he'll recover, though it will take time. He's upstairs now, confined to bed." "And the shooter?" "Unknown." Her mouth tightened into a thin line. "But I have my suspicions. We've been having trouble with a man named Victor Harlan. He owns the Double Cross Ranch to the east. He's been trying to buy our land for 2 years, ever since he discovered there might be copper deposits in the eastern section." Asher nodded slowly. "And your father refused to sell." "He built this ranch from nothing, Mr. Townsend. This land is his legacy, his life's work." Her green eyes flashed with emotion. "And mine as well. I grew up here. Even when I was away at school, I always knew I would return." "So you think this Harlan had your father shot?" "I can't prove it," she admitted. "But the timing is suspicious. The shooting happened right after my father publicly refused Harlan's latest offer, which was substantial, I should add." Asher considered this information. "And the sheriff? What's he doing about it?" Nora's expression hardened. "Sheriff Hollister is cautious. He claims there's not enough evidence to accuse Harlan, who is a prominent businessman with connections to the territorial governor. But I believe the sheriff is simply afraid to cross him." "That explains why you were at his office yesterday." She nodded. "I was trying again to convince him to investigate more thoroughly." She sighed, running a hand along the edge of one of the ledgers. "In the meantime, we've lost several hands. Some were frightened off after the shooting. Others were persuaded to seek employment elsewhere, likely by Harlan's men. And that's why you hired me so quickly," Asher concluded. "You're desperate for men who can work the ranch and possibly defend it." "Yes." She met his gaze directly. "I won't lie to you, Mr. Townsend. This job comes with risks. If you want to ride on to California, I would understand." Asher was quiet for a moment. He had spent years avoiding other people's troubles, focusing solely on survival and staying one step ahead of his own past. The sensible thing would be to thank this woman for her honesty and continue on his way. But something about Nora Galloway's quiet determination struck a chord in him. Here was someone fighting for something that mattered, something worth protecting. It had been a long time since Asher had felt that kind of purpose. "I've faced worse odds," he found himself saying. "And I'm good with a gun, if it comes to that. I'll stay, at least until your father's back on his feet." Relief visibly washed over her features, though she quickly composed herself. "Thank you, Mr. Townsend. The pay is $40 a month, plus room and board in the bunkhouse." "That's fair." He rose from his chair. "I should get started then. Who's running things in your father's absence?" "I am," she said simply, standing as well. "With help from our foreman, Thomas Jenkins. He'll show you around and get you settled." Asher raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. It was unusual for a woman to take such a direct hand in running a cattle operation, especially one this size. "You know ranching, then?" Something like defiance flashed in her eyes. "I was riding before I could walk, Mr. Townsend, and helping with roundups by the time I was 12. My schooling in Boston was for business and accounting, at my father's insistence, so I could help him manage the ranch more effectively. This may be a man's world, but it's my world too. Asher couldn't help the small smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth. Yes, madam. I don't doubt it for a second. For the first time since they'd met, Nora Galloway's expression softened into something approaching a genuine smile. Tom should be in the barn. He'll get you sorted. As Asher left the house, he found himself intrigued by Nora Galloway in a way he hadn't been intrigued by a woman in years. There was something compelling about her, a blend of Eastern refinement and frontier grit that was as unusual as it was attractive. But he quickly pushed such thoughts aside. He was here to do a job, nothing more. And given the circumstances, it promised to be a challenging one at that. The foreman, Thomas Jenkins, proved to be a grizzled veteran of the range in his late 50s, with a no-nonsense manner and a wealth of experience. He gave Asher a quick tour of the ranch, outlined his duties, and introduced him to the other hands, only 5 in total, where there should have been at least 15 for an operation this size. We're running on fumes, Tom admitted as they walked back toward the corrals. Lost 3 good men after Mr. Galloway was shot, and 4 more got better offers from the double cross. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. Better offers meaning more money and less chance of getting shot in the back. Miss Galloway seems determined to hold on, Asher observed. Tom nodded, a hint of pride in his weathered features. That she is. Came back from that fancy school of hers and stepped right into running things alongside her pa. Never seen a woman with such a head for business and ranching both. When Mr. Galloway got shot, she didn't falter for a second. Took charge like she'd been doing it all her life. He gave Asher a sidelong glance. She told you about our troubles then? She did. Sounds like this Harlan is playing for keeps. Harlan's the type who's used to getting what he wants, Tom said grimly. And he wants this land bad. Word is he's already sold the rights to a mining company back east, promising delivery of the property by summer's end. He spat in the dust. Man's counting his money before the deal's even made. Asher considered this. So, we can expect more trouble. Count on it. Tom handed Asher a coil of rope. But for now, we've got work to do. I need you to help Billy and the others mend that south fence line. It's been down for a week and we've already lost a dozen head through the gap. With that, Asher's first day at the Galloway Ranch began in earnest. The work was hard but familiar, mending fences, checking cattle, repairing corral gates. By sundown, his muscles ached with the pleasant fatigue of honest labor, something he had missed during his weeks on the trail. The hands ate their evening meal together in the bunkhouse, a simple but sturdy structure with 8 bunks, a wood stove, and a long table. The cook, an older Mexican man named Manuel, served up beans, cornbread, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. As they ate, Asher listened to the conversations around him, gathering information. The remaining hands seemed loyal to the Galloway family, but there was an undercurrent of anxiety that was impossible to miss. These men were worried, and with good reason. Heard riders last night, one of the hands, a quiet man called Davis, mentioned between bites. Out by the east boundary, Tom nodded grimly. Saw the tracks this morning, 4 men I'd say, just scouting most like. Or rustling, another hand suggested. That new bull cost Mr. Galloway $500. Would be ashamed to lose him. Miss Nora wants to start night patrols, Tom said. 2 men, rotating shifts. Townsend, you up for taking the first watch with me tonight? Asher nodded. I'll get my rifle. After dinner, as the others settled in for the night, Asher and Tom saddled fresh horses and headed out to patrol the eastern boundary of the ranch. The night was clear, with a half moon providing just enough light to see by, without making them overly visible to anyone watching. They rode mostly in silence, both men alert for any signs of intruders. About 2 hours into their patrol, as they approached a wooded area near the property line, Tom suddenly raised his hand in a signal to halt. Listen, he whispered. Asher strained his ears and caught at the soft nicker of a horse somewhere in the trees ahead. Both men dismounted silently, securing their horses to a nearby juniper. Drawing their weapons, they crept forward on the foot, using the cover of the underbrush. As they neared a small clearing, Asher could make out 3 men gathered around a small, carefully shielded campfire. Their horses were tethered nearby, and rifles rested within easy reach. Harlan's men, Tom breathed, barely audible. Recognize Carson and Wells, don't know the third one. Asher nodded, straining to hear their conversation. The words drifted to them in fragments. Tomorrow night, eastern pasture, the bull first. The girl is the problem. Old man's still laid up. Harlan says, make it look like an accident. Tom and Asher exchanged grim looks. They had heard enough. Carefully, they backed away until they were far enough to speak without being overheard. They're planning to rustle that bull tomorrow night, Tom said, but sounds like they've got something else in mind, too. Something involving Miss Galloway, Asher agreed, and making it look like an accident. We need to warn her. They retrieved their horses and rode back toward the ranch at a faster pace, keeping alert for any signs they were being followed. The main house was dark when they arrived, but a light still burned in one of the downstairs windows. Tom knocked softly, and moments later, Nora opened the door, a small oil lamp in her hand. She was dressed simply, her hair loose around her shoulders. The sight of it momentarily distracted Asher. He hadn't realized how long it was, falling in dark waves almost to her waist. Tom? Mr. Townsend? What is it? Her voice was alert, despite the late hour. Trouble, Miss Nora, Tom said quietly. We spotted 3 of Harlan's men camped near the east boundary. They're planning something for tomorrow night. Rustling for certain, but also... He hesitated. Also what? She prompted, her expression tightening. We overheard them mention you specifically, Asher said. Something about you being the problem and making something look like an accident. They didn't give details, but the implication was clear enough. Nora's face paled slightly, but her voice remained steady. I see. You'd better come in. She led them to the study, setting the lamp on the desk and gesturing for them to sit. Tell me everything you heard, exactly as you heard it. They recounted the overheard conversation as precisely as possible. Nora listened without interruption, her expression grave. This isn't surprising, she said when they had finished. Harlan has made it clear that, with my father incapacitated, I'm the only obstacle to his plans. He's tried bribing me, threatening me, and now it seems he's escalating to more direct methods. Miss Nora, Tom said urgently, you need to be careful. Maybe stay in town for a few days, at least until we can bring in more men. She shook her head firmly. I will not be driven from my home, Tom, and I certainly won't abandon my father or this ranch. She turned to a drawer in the desk, opened it, and removed a small revolver. I'm not helpless. Father made sure of that. Asher studied her with newfound respect. Many women in her position would have been terrified, but Nora Galloway showed only determination. We should set a trap, he suggested. Use their plan against them. If they're coming for the bull tomorrow night, we'll be waiting. Nora considered this. That could work, but we're short-handed as it is. I know a few men in town who might help, Tom offered. Former hands who left for safer work, but they're good men. They might come back for a fight, even if they wouldn't for regular work. It's worth trying, she agreed. Ride in at first light and see who you can round up. Offer double wages for the week. She turned to Asher. Mr. Townsend, I'd like you to stay close to the house tomorrow. I need to check on the western pastures. But I don't think I should ride alone. Yes, madam, he nodded. I'll be ready at whatever time you need. As they rose to leave, Nora placed a hand on Asher's arm, stopping him. The touch was brief, but sent an unexpected warmth through him. Thank you, she said quietly, for the warning and for staying. Many men would have moved on after learning about our situation. Asher met her gaze. I gave my word, Miss Galloway. I don't give it lightly. Something in her eyes softened. Please, call me Nora. If we're going to be fighting side by side, formality seems unnecessary. Nora, he repeated, finding he liked the way her name felt on his lips. Then I'm Asher. A small smile touched her mouth. Good night, Asher. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow promises to be eventful. As he walked back to the bunkhouse under the star-strewn sky, Asher realized he had just voluntarily stepped into the very kind of trouble he'd spent years avoiding. Yet, strangely, he felt more alive than he had in a long time. There was purpose here, something worth fighting for, not just the ranch, but the woman who was so determined to defend it. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with Tom riding out to town as planned, while the remaining hands tended to the essential ranch work. Asher had just finished helping Billy repair a broken water pump when he saw Nora emerge from the house, dressed for riding. He met her at the corral, where she was already saddling a spirited-looking bay gelding. "Good morning," she greeted him, her manner brisk but not unfriendly. "I hope you slept well despite the late night." "Well enough," he replied, reaching for his own saddle. "Where are we headed?" "The western pasture first. We moved a portion of the herd there last week, after we started having trouble. I want to make sure they're secure." She tightened the cinch with practiced efficiency. "Then, I'd like to check the condition of the line shack out that way. If we need to move my father for safety, it might be an option." They rode out minutes later, heading west across the sprawling ranch lands. As they traveled, Nora pointed out various features of the property, the best grazing areas, the reliable water sources, the spots where the fencing needed work. She spoke with obvious pride and deep knowledge of the land. "You really do know ranching," Asher commented as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a verdant valley where several dozen cattle grazed peacefully. She glanced at him, a hint of challenge in her expression. "Did you doubt it?" "Not exactly," he admitted. "But it's rare to find a woman so involved in the business end of ranching. Most I've known were more concerned with the household." "My mother died when I was 8, Nora said, her gaze returning to the landscape. "After that, it was just my father and me. He needed help, and there was no one else, so I learned everything he could teach me." A small smile softened her features. "I discovered I had a talent for it. The numbers, the planning, understanding the cycles of the land and the cattle. It felt right in a way nothing else ever has." "That's why you came back after your schooling," Asher observed. She nodded. "Boston was educational. I learned a great deal, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. But this," she gestured to the land spread out before them, "this is where I belong. I never wanted anything else." They continued riding, checking on the cattle, and finding them in good condition. The line shack, when they reached it, proved to be a sturdy, if simple structure that could indeed serve as a temporary shelter if needed. As Nora inspected the inside, Asher remained outside, scanning the surrounding terrain. The attack Harlan's men were planning wouldn't likely happen until night, but vigilance was still necessary. "It will need cleaning, but it's sound," Nora announced as she emerged from the shack. "There's a good spring nearby that never runs dry, even in summer." They secured the building and began the ride back, taking a different route that led them through a narrow canyon. The walls rose steeply on either side, creating a natural corridor that funneled the breeze into a pleasant coolness despite the midday sun. "My father proposed to my mother in this canyon," Nora said unexpectedly, her voice softer than Asher had heard it before. "He told me it was the most beautiful place he knew, and the only place worthy of asking for her hand." "It is beautiful," Asher agreed, looking around at the red gold stone walls rising majestically around them. "He must have loved her very much." "He did." Nora's expression grew distant. "He never remarried, though many suggested he should. Said he'd had the best, and wouldn't settle for less." She hesitated, then added, "Sometimes I worry that's my future as well, alone, clinging to memories of what might have been." The confession seemed to surprise even her, and she quickly straightened in her saddle, as if regretting the moment of vulnerability. Asher studied her profile, struck by the complexity of this woman, so capable and determined in her role as rancher, yet harboring the same doubts and fears as anyone else. "Why would you be alone?" he asked carefully. "Surely there have been suitors." A rueful smile crossed her lips. "Oh, there have been. In Boston, several young men from good families expressed interest. And here, before I left for school, a few of the local boys had notions." She shook her head. "But none of them understood." "Understood what?" "This life." She gestured around them. "The ranch, the land, what it means to be part of something like this. The Boston men saw me as a curiosity, a frontier girl they could civilize and show off in society. And the local boys, they wanted a wife who would keep house and raise children, not one who could read ledgers and plan cattle drives." She sighed, the sound carrying a resigned acceptance. "I've made my peace with it. This ranch is my life, and I wouldn't trade it, even if it means I face it alone." Something in her words resonated with Asher, that sense of not quite fitting into the world's expectations, of making choices that set one apart from others. "I understand more than you might think," he found himself saying. I've been on my own most of my life, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. Always the stranger, the outsider. Why? She asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. What keeps you moving? Asher was silent for a moment, uncertain how much to share. It had been years since he'd spoken of his past to anyone, yet something about Nora Galloway made him want to be honest. I was a sheriff once, he said finally, in a small town in Colorado, young and idealistic, thinking I could make a difference. He shook his head at the memory. There was a wealthy man there too, not unlike your Harlan. Name was Westcott. He owned the local mine, and with it, most of the town. When his men mistreated the workers or cheated them of wages, no one stood against him. Except you, Nora guessed. Except me, Asher confirmed. I started enforcing the law equally, regardless of who broke it. Westcott didn't take kindly to that. He tried bribes first, then threats. He paused, the memory still sharp after all these years. When those didn't work, he sent 3 men to teach me a lesson one night. I managed to fight them off, but in the struggle, a lantern was knocked over. The fire spread to a nearby building where a family was sleeping. Nora's expression softened with understanding. Were they hurt? The parents got out. The child didn't. Asher's voice grew rough. After that, Westcott spread the word that I'd been drunk on duty, that the fire was my fault. He had witnesses ready to swear to it, men who owed him or feared him. I knew I'd never get a fair hearing, so I left. Been drifting ever since. They rode in silence for a while after that. The only sounds the steady rhythm of their horses' hooves and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. I'm sorry, Nora said finally. That's a heavy burden to carry alone. It was a long time ago, Asher replied, though they both knew such wounds never fully healed. My point is, I understand something about standing on principles, even when it costs you, and about being alone because of it. As they emerged from the canyon into open rangeland, Nora reined her horse to a stop and turned to face him fully. Her expression was earnest, her eyes searching his. Thank you for telling me, she said softly, for trusting me with that. Asher nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were, of the way the sunlight caught in her dark hair, bringing out auburn highlights he hadn't noticed before. The moment was broken by the distant sound of a rifle shot, both of them tensed, instantly alert. That came from the direction of the ranch, Nora said, alarm evident in her voice. Without further discussion, they urged their horses into a gallop, racing back toward the main buildings. As they drew closer, they could hear more gunfire, sporadic shots that suggested a skirmish rather than an all-out battle. They crested a hill and saw the situation below. 3 riders were circling one of the outlying corrals, where Billy and another hand were taking cover behind a water trough, occasionally rising to fire back at their attackers. They've come earlier than we expected, Nora said grimly, pulling her small revolver from her saddlebag. They must have changed their plans. Stay here, Asher instructed, drawing his own weapon. I'll circle around and come at them from behind. I will not stay here, she retorted firmly. This is my ranch, my fight. Before he could argue further, she kicked her horse forward, charging down the hill toward the corral. Cursing under his breath, Asher followed, splitting off to approach from a different angle as he'd planned. The attackers were so focused on Billy and the other hand that they didn't notice the new threats until it was too late. Asher got off 2 shots, hitting one of the riders in the shoulder and causing another's horse to rear in panic. Nora, to his surprise, proved to be a decent shot herself, her bullet grazing the 3rd attacker's leg. The sudden reversal of fortunes was enough to send the would-be raiders fleeing, one of them clutching his wounded shoulder as they galloped away toward the eastern boundary. "Billy! Jed! Are you hurt?" Nora called as she dismounted near the corral. "We're fine, Miss Nora," Billy replied, emerging from behind the water trough. "They was trying to get to that new bull, just like you thought they might. We spotted 'em coming and managed to get to cover before they started shooting." Asher joined them, his eyes scanning the horizon in case the attackers decided to return with reinforcements. "They'll be back, and probably with more men." Nora nodded grimly. "We need to get ready. Tom should be returning soon, hopefully with more hands." She turned to Billy. "Go check on my father, make sure he's secure, and let him know what's happened." As Billy hurried toward the main house, Nora and Asher, along with Jed, quickly assessed the situation. No serious damage had been done, and the valuable bull was still safely in the corral. "They were testing our defenses," Asher observed, "seeing how many men we have, how well we can respond." "And now they know we were expecting trouble," Nora added, "which means they might change tactics for tonight." "Or strike again sooner," Asher agreed. "Either way, we need to be prepared." The rest of the afternoon was spent in tense preparation. Tom returned from town with 3 additional men, former Galloway hands, who had agreed to come back to help defend the ranch. It wasn't many, but it improved their odds considerably. As evening approached, Asher found Nora in the barn, checking the loads in her revolver with practiced precision. Her expression was focused, determined, but he could see the strain and the tightness around her eyes. "You should rest," he suggested. "It's going to be a long night." She shook her head. "I couldn't sleep if I tried." She slipped the revolver into its holster and looked up at him. "I just checked on my father. He insisted on having his shotgun brought to his room, despite the doctor's orders to avoid exertion. He's as stubborn as I am." "Must run in the family," Asher observed with a small smile. That earned a brief laugh from her. "Indeed it does." She sobered quickly. "Asher, I want to thank you again. You could have ridden out when the trouble started, but you stayed." "I told you, I gave my word." "It's more than that," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "Most men say many things. Few stand by their words when it truly matters." She hesitated, then added, "Whatever happens tonight, I'm glad you're here." There was something in her voice, a warmth that went beyond gratitude, that made Asher's heart beat a little faster. He found himself wanting to reach out to her, to offer comfort or reassurance beyond mere words. Before he could respond, Tom appeared at the barn door. "Riders coming," he announced grimly. "At least a dozen, approaching from the east." The moment broken, Nora immediately shifted back into the role of ranch owner, her voice steady as she issued instructions. "Get everyone into position. Remember the plan. Let them get close to the bull's corral before we show ourselves. We need to catch them in the open." As darkness fell, the defenders of the Galloway ranch took their places. Tom and 2 men in the barn overlooking the main corral. Billy and another hand hidden in the bunkhouse with clear lines of fire, and Asher and Nora positioned in an equipment shed near where the valuable bull was kept. The wait was tense, the silence broken only by the occasional soft nickering of horses and the distant call of a coyote. Asher could feel Nora beside him, her breathing measured and controlled despite the danger. "They're coming," she whispered eventually, as the sound of approaching horses became audible. Asher nodded, tightening his grip on his rifle. Through a crack in the shed wall, he could make out shadowy figures on horseback, moving with careful stealth toward the corral where the bull was kept. There were indeed about a dozen men, more than they had anticipated. The attackers dismounted near the corral, obviously planning to lead the bull away quietly rather than risk gunfire that might damage their valuable target. 4 men approached the corral gate while the others stood guard, weapons ready. "Now!" Nora breathed, raising her rifle. Her shot was the signal. Immediately, gunfire erupted from all the defensive positions around the ranch yard. 2 of Harlan's men fell in the first volley, while the others scrambled for cover, returning fire. The night exploded into chaos muzzle flashes, illuminating the darkness in brief, stark moments. The thunder of gunfire, shouts and cries, as bullets found their marks. Asher fired methodically, making each shot count, aware that they were outnumbered, despite their initial advantage of surprise. Beside him, Nora was equally focused, her aim steady and true. She was no stranger to firearms. That much was clear. The battle seemed to stretch on endlessly, though in reality it probably lasted less than 15 minutes. The attackers, finding themselves caught in a crossfire and having already taken casualties, began to retreat. "They're pulling back," Asher observed, pausing to reload his rifle. Just as the words left his mouth, the door to their hiding place was wrenched open. A burly man with a wild beard stood there, revolver aimed directly at them. In the split second it took Asher to swing his rifle around, Nora had already fired her revolver. The man staggered backward, clutching his chest, and fell. "Behind the shed!" she called out, having spotted more movement from the corner of her eye. Asher spun, firing at another shadowy figure attempting to flank their position. The man cried out and retreated into the darkness. For several tense moments, they waited for another attack, but it seemed the fight had gone out of Harlan's men. The sounds of retreating horses confirmed that the remaining attackers were fleeing. "Is anyone hurt?" Nora called out once the immediate danger had passed. "Jed took a bullet in the arm," Tom's voice came back. "Nothing too serious. Billy's got a graze on his cheek. Everyone else is whole." "Check the house," Nora instructed. "Make sure my father is safe." As Tom and the others secured the ranch yard and tended to the wounded, Asher and Nora cautiously emerged from their shelter. The ranch yard was littered with evidence of the battle-spent shell casings, a few blood trails leading away into the darkness, and the body of the man Nora had shot. "I've never killed a man before," she said quietly, staring at the fallen figure with a mixture of shock and grim resolution. Asher placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did what you had to do. He would have killed us both without hesitation." She nodded, drawing a deep breath to steady herself. "I know, I just never thought it would come to this." They walked together toward the main house, both alert for any signs of danger, though it seemed the attack was truly over. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. The house was secure, Nathan Galloway unharmed, though visibly agitated at having been confined to his bed during the fight. Nora spent a few minutes reassuring her father before returning to help organize the cleanup and care for the wounded. By full daylight, they had a clearer picture of the night's events. 3 of Harlan's men were dead, including the one Nora had shot. Based on the blood trails, at least 4 others had been wounded. None of the Galloway hands had been killed, though Jed would need time to recover from his arm wound. "They won't try again right away," Tom predicted as they gathered for a late breakfast. "They've lost too many men. Harlan will need to regroup." "But he won't give up," Nora said grimly. "Not until he gets what he wants or is stopped for good." "Then we stop him for good," Asher said simply. "This can't continue. It's time to take the fight to him." Nora looked at him sharply. "What are you suggesting?" "Evidence," Asher replied. "The sheriff wouldn't act without it. Now we have it. One of those men back there," he nodded toward where the bodies had been covered with tarps, awaiting proper burial, "might be carrying something that links back to Harlan. A letter, payment vouchers, something." Understanding dawned in Nora's eyes. "And if we can prove Harlan ordered the attack, then the sheriff would have to act, connections to the governor or not," Asher finished. Tom was already rising from the table. "I'll check their belongings." An hour later, they had their evidence, a folded paper found in the pocket of one of the dead attackers, detailing payment for services to be rendered at the Galloway Ranch, and signed with Harlan's distinctive flourish. "This is it," Nora said, hope evident in her voice for the first time in days. "This should be enough for even Sheriff Hollister to act on." "I'll ride into town and bring him back here," Tom offered. "He needs to see this for himself, and the bodies as proof of what happened." As Tom rode out, Nora and Asher took the opportunity to finally rest after the long night. They sat on the front porch of the main house, mugs of strong coffee in hand, watching as the other hands tended to the necessary chores of the ranch. "What will you do once this is over?" Nora asked after a comfortable silence. "Continue on to California?" Asher considered the question, realizing he hadn't thought much about his future plans since arriving at the ranch. The past few days had consumed all his attention. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "California was just a destination, not a plan. Somewhere new to start over, I suppose." "You could stay," Nora said, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "We'll need good hands to rebuild after all this, and you've more than proven your worth." "As a ranch hand?" Asher asked, something in her tone making him wonder if there was more to her offer. She turned to face him then, a hint of vulnerability in her expression that she rarely allowed to show. "Perhaps as more than that, in time, if you were interested." The directness of her words surprised him, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Nora Galloway was not a woman who shied away from speaking her mind. "I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it," Asher replied carefully. "But my life has been unsettled for a long time. I'm not sure I know how to stay in one place anymore. And you deserve better than a drifter with a troubled past." "I think I can decide for myself what I deserve," she said, a touch of her usual firmness returning to her voice. "And I've seen enough of you to know that your past doesn't define who you are now." She paused, then added more softly, "I've spent years believing no man would want the life I've chosen running a ranch, making business decisions, being more than just a wife and mother. It's why I never seriously considered any of my suitors. They all wanted to change me, to make me fit their idea of what a woman should be." Asher found himself reaching for her hand before he quite realized what he was doing. "I wouldn't want to change anything about you. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met." The smile that spread across her face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and full of promise. "Then, perhaps we have something to discuss once this business with Harlan is settled." They were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Tom had returned, bringing not only Sheriff Hollister, but also 2 deputies and, surprisingly, the territorial marshal. The next few hours were a flurry of activity statements taken, bodies examined, evidence reviewed. The marshal, a no-nonsense man named Buchanan, took charge of the investigation with a thoroughness that reassured everyone. "This is more than enough to arrest Harlan," he declared after reviewing all the evidence and testimonies. "Sheriff, I'll need your deputies to accompany me to the Double Cross. We'll take him into custody immediately." Sheriff Hollister, looking somewhat abashed at the marshal's implied criticism of his previous inaction, nodded agreement. "Of course, Marshal. We'll support you fully." As the lawman prepared to leave, Marshal Buchanan approached Asher, studying him with a thoughtful expression. "Townsend," he said, "the name sounds familiar. Weren't you a sheriff yourself once, up in Colorado?" Asher tensed, uncertain how to respond. His past was not something he typically discussed with law enforcement. But before he could decide on an answer, Nora stepped forward. "Mr. Townsend has been invaluable in defending this ranch," she said firmly. "Whatever his past may be, he has my complete trust." The marshal nodded slowly. "I'm not here to dredge up old business, Miss Galloway. Just curious." He turned back to Asher. "I heard about what happened in Silver Creek. Always thought it didn't sound right you had a good reputation before that incident. If you're ever interested in clearing your name, I might be able to help. The Westcott mine closed last year, and some former employees have been talking. Seems they have stories to tell that might interest you." With that intriguing statement, the marshal tipped his hat and joined the others, leaving Asher standing in stunned silence. "What does that mean?" Nora asked quietly once the lawmen had ridden off. "It means," Asher said slowly, "that perhaps my past isn't as impossible to escape as I thought." The arrest of Victor Harlan later that day sent shockwaves through the region. The powerful rancher had seemed untouchable. His connections to the territorial governor, supposedly ensuring his immunity from serious consequences. But the evidence was irrefutable, and with the territorial marshal personally involved, not even political influence could save him. In the days that followed, a sense of normalcy gradually returned to the Galloway ranch. Nathan Galloway continued to recover from his wounds, growing stronger each day. Several of the hands who had left returned, drawn back by word of the successful defense against Harlan's men and the promise of stable employment now that the threat was removed. Asher remained, working alongside the other hands but spending increasingly more time with Nora. Their shared experience during the attack had forged a connection between them that deepened with each passing day. They rode the ranch together, discussing improvements and plans for the future. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch, talking long into the night about their lives, their hopes, and the possibilities that now seemed to be opening before them. A week after Harlan's arrest, Marshal Buchanan returned to the ranch, bringing news that the rancher had been indicted on multiple charges, including attempted murder and conspiracy. But he also brought something else, a letter from a former miner in Silver Creek, detailing how Westcott had orchestrated the fire and framed Asher for it. "It's not complete exoneration," the marshal explained as Asher read the letter with growing amazement. "But it's a start. With this testimony and a few others I've collected, we could reopen the case, clear your name officially." "Why would you do this for me?" Asher asked, genuinely puzzled by the marshal's interest in his case. Buchanan shrugged. "I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, seen a lot of corruption, a lot of good men brought down by powerful interests. If I can right one such wrong before I retire, I'll consider it time well spent." He rose to leave. "Think about it. Let me know what you decide." After the marshal's departure, Asher found Nora waiting for him in the garden behind the main house. a place she often retreated to when she needed quiet reflection. "What will you do?" she asked as he approached, obviously having overheard at least part of his conversation with Buchanan. Asher sat beside her on the small wooden bench, the letter still in his hand. "I don't know. For so long I've been running from that past, trying to forget it. The idea that I could face it, maybe even clear my name." He shook his head, the concept still difficult to grasp. "You should do it," Nora said softly, placing her hand over his. "Not because you need to be exonerated in the eyes of the law or society, but for yourself. To close that chapter properly so you can begin a new one." He looked at her then, this remarkable woman who had fought so hard for her own dreams, and now seemed to be encouraging him to reclaim his. "A new chapter here?" he asked, the question containing all the hope and uncertainty he felt about their growing relationship. Her smile was warm, her eyes clear and certain. "If that's what you want. I've told you what I want, a partner who respects who I am and what this ranch means to me. Someone who sees my strength as an asset, not a challenge to be overcome." She squeezed his hand gently. "I think you could be that person, Asher, if you want to be." In that moment, looking into Nora's eyes, Asher felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging, of having found a place and a person worth staying for. "I've spent most of my adult life believing no woman would want the kind of life I've led," he admitted. "The danger, the uncertainty, the shadows of my past. I never thought I had anything worthwhile to offer someone like you." Nora reached up, her fingers gently brushing against his cheek. "And I spent years believing no man would want a woman who cares more about cattle prices and water rights than dinner parties and sewing circles." Her voice softened. "Perhaps we've both been looking at things the wrong way." "Perhaps we have," Asher agreed, catching her hand in his. "Nora, when I heard those men planning to harm you, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting to defend this ranch or to honor my word. I was fighting for you, for the chance to know you better, to see where this connection between us might lead." "And where do you think it might lead?" she asked, her voice steady though he could see the emotion in her eyes. "I think it could lead to a future neither of us expected, but both of us might want very much," he said, "if you're willing to take a chance on a former lawman with a complicated past." "Asher," she said, her smile widening, "this life running a ranch in this wild country, facing whatever challenges come our way together, it's exactly what I've prayed for." The words hit him with unexpected force. Piercing through layers of doubt and resignation he had built around his heart over the years. Here was someone who not only accepted the life he could offer, but embraced it wholeheartedly. Unable to find words adequate to express what he was feeling, Asher did the only thing that seemed right. In that moment he leaned forward and kissed her. Her response was immediate and unequivocal, her lips soft yet insistent against his, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they finally separated, both somewhat breathless, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "I think your father might have something to say about this development," he murmured. Nora laughed softly. "He's already said it. He told me yesterday that if I didn't convince you to stay permanently, he'd have to question my business sense for letting a valuable asset right away." "Is that all I am? A valuable asset?" Asher asked with mock indignation. "Well," she replied, her eyes sparkling with humor and affection, "you are exceptionally good with the horses, and you did help save the ranch. But no, that's not all you are, not to me." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their moment. They turned to see Nathan Galloway making his way slowly toward them, leaning on a cane, but otherwise looking remarkably improved from the last time Asher had seen him. "Don't get up on my account," the older man said as they began to rise. "I just came out for some fresh air and to see if my daughter had finally talked some sense into you, Townsend." Asher stood anyway, extending his hand to the ranch owner. "She's very persuasive, sir." Nathan shook Asher's hand with a firm grip that belied his recent injury. "That she is? Gets it from her mother." He looked between them, his expression softening. "I've watched you these past weeks, Townsend. Seen how you work, how you handle yourself in a crisis, how you look at my daughter when you think no one's watching." He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "You've got my blessing, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth a great deal, Father," Nora said, rising to kiss him on the cheek. "Thank you. Just don't take too long about it. Nathan advised. "Life's shorter than you think, and there's a lot of ranch that needs running. I'd like to see my grandchildren before I'm too old to teach them how to ride." With a wink that suggested he was feeling much better indeed, he turned and made his way back toward the house. "Well," Asher said after a moment, "that was unexpectedly straightforward." Nora laughed. "Did I mention that directness is a Galloway family trait?" Her expression grew more serious. "He's right, though, about not waiting too long. We've both spent enough time denying ourselves what we truly want." Asher took her hands in his, suddenly certain of what he needed to do. "Then, let me be equally direct. I love you, Nora Galloway. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you marched into that saloon looking for the sheriff, and every day since has only confirmed it. I want to build a life here, with you, if you'll have me." "I love you too, Asher," she replied without hesitation, her green eyes shining. "And yes, I'll have you. As my partner, my husband, my love." They sealed this declaration with another kiss, this one deeper and filled with promise for the future they would create together. In the months that followed, the Galloway Ranch flourished under their joint care. Asher, with Marshal Buchanan's help, eventually cleared his name, though he declined the marshal's offer to return to law enforcement. His place was on the ranch now, alongside Nora. Their wedding, held in the garden where they had confessed their love, was a joyous affair attended by the entire community. Nathan Galloway, fully recovered by then, proudly walked his daughter down the aisle, his face beaming with approval as he placed her hand in Asher's. As they exchanged their vows beneath an arch of wildflowers, Asher reflected on the twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. What had begun as a temporary stop on his journey west had become the destination he had been seeking all along, without even realizing it. And when Nora looked into his eyes and promised to love and honor him for all her days, Asher knew with absolute certainty that he had found his home, at last, not just in this beautiful ranch nestled among the Arizona hills, but in the heart of the extraordinary woman who had seen in him not the drifter or the man with a troubled past, but a partner worthy of her love and her life. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Asher stood on the porch of the main house, watching as Nora showed their 4-year-old son, Matthew, how to properly brush down his pony. The boy, with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes, listened with serious attention to her instructions before breaking into delighted laughter when the pony nuzzled his pocket in search of treats. "He's a natural horseman," Nathan Galloway observed, joining Asher on the porch. Though now in his 60s, the elder Galloway remained actively involved in the ranch, his experience and wisdom invaluable. "Takes after his mother," Asher replied with a smile. "She's got him reading the cattle ledgers already. Says it's never too early to learn." Nathan chuckled. "And your daughter? Will she be a rancher too, do you think?" Asher glanced toward where their 2-year-old daughter, Sarah, was toddling after a butterfly in the garden, her chubby legs determined in their pursuit. "If she's anything like her mother and grandfather, we won't be able to keep her away from it." The Galloway Ranch had prospered beyond all expectations in the years since Harlan's downfall. With Asher's practical experience and Nora's business acumen, they had expanded their operations, improved their breeding stock, and established themselves as one of the most successful ranches in the territory. But their greatest joy came not from business success, but from the family they had created together. Every night, Asher thanked whatever twist of fate had led him to Juniper Springs on that dusty evening years ago, when a determined young woman had walked into a saloon and unwittingly changed the course of his life forever. As he watched Nora look up from her lesson with Matthew, her face lighting with a smile as she caught sight of him on the porch, Asher felt the familiar warmth spread through his chest. The words she had spoken in the garden that day still resonated in his heart. "It's exactly what I've prayed for. For a man who had once believed no woman would want the life he could offer, there could be no greater blessing than this, to be loved, not despite who he was, but because of it. To have found in Nora not just a wife, but a true partner who shared his vision, his values, and his dreams." As the morning sun climbed higher in the Arizona sky, casting its golden light over the land they both loved, Asher Townsend knew with absolute certainty that he had found not just a place to belong, but a love that would endure through whatever challenges the future might bring. And in this knowledge, there was peace, contentment, and a joy deeper than he had ever imagined possible.